Some of you suburban mums are absolutely obsessed with the S-Worker Storytimes on TikTok. The crazy clients, the ridiculous requests, the married men, the money, the gifts, the outrageous bookings, and you sit on the couch scrolling through them after the kids have gone to bed, laughing in the comments and asking for a part 2. But I want to ask you a question that might suddenly make those stories a whole lot less entertaining. What if the married client in the story was your husband? What if the man everyone in the comments was laughing about was the same man who kissed you goodbye that morning, told you he was going to work, and came home that evening asking what was for dinner? Would you still be asking for a part 2? Because I spent years inside that industry. I worked as an S-worker. I worked online. I was an OF model and a financial dominatrix. I've seen this world from the side that most women watching these videos never will. And now that I'm outside of it, there's something about the way our culture consumes S-work content that I find incredibly strange. We've somehow managed to turn something that can involve betrayal, secrecy, loneliness, broken relationships, and incredibly complicated human beings into entertainment. And before anyone starts typing, "You're blaming sex workers," no, I'm not. This is not an attack on sex workers. I know these women. I was one of these women. And I know that behind the makeup, the bookings, the money, and the outrageous stories, there are human beings with families, trauma, personalities, dreams, fears, and reasons why they are where they are. But compassion for sex workers does not require us to romanticize the sex industry. And it certainly doesn't require us to pretend that the people involved in these stories cease to be humans simply because we're watching them through. Because here's what I think social media has done incredibly effectively. It has removed the consequences from the story. You hear, "You'll never believe what this client asked me to do." You don't see his wife. You hear, "This married guy booked me and then said the craziest thing." You don't see the woman at home. You hear about the money he spent. You don't see the joint bank account. You hear about the hotel room. You don't see the family photograph sitting on his bedside table. You hear the punchline, and you don't see the fallout. And that distance makes everything so much easier to consume. Because it's incredibly easy to laugh at betrayal when the betrayed person is completely invisible. It's easy to say, "Oh my gosh, men are so terrible," and scroll on to the next video when these people exist only as characters in someone else's story. But somewhere, potentially, there's a real woman. Maybe she's packing lunches. Maybe she's doing school pickup. Maybe she's sitting beside him on the couch while he's scrolling through his phone. Maybe she thinks they have a good marriage. Maybe they've been struggling and she thinks they're working through it. Maybe they've just celebrated their anniversary. Maybe she's pregnant. Maybe she's raising 3 kids with him, and maybe she has absolutely no idea. And I'm not saying every S-worker client is married. Of course they're not. I'm talking specifically about the stories where marriage and infidelity are part of the entertainment. Because when that happens, there's another person in that story who never consented to becoming part of it. And this is where I think we need to have a much bigger conversation about what social media has done to our understanding of sex. We talk constantly about consent between the people directly involved in a sexual interaction, and we should. But we don't talk nearly enough about the relational consequences. We don't talk about what happens when sexual choices collide with promises that you've made to someone else. We don't talk about the wife who did not consent to her marriage becoming sexually non-monogamous. We don't talk about what happens when she discovers it. And strangely, some of the people consuming this content are women who would be absolutely devastated if the exact same behavior entered their own marriage. That's the contradiction that I can't stop thinking about. You can sit there laughing at a story about someone else's cheating husband, while knowing that discovering your own husband had been secretly paying another woman could completely shatter your world. And maybe somebody will say, well, that's the husband's fault. He made the vows. And yes, he did. If a married man secretly pays for it, he is responsible for betraying the commitment that he made to his wife. I'm not interested in removing his agency or transferring all responsibility onto the woman that he paid. But that's not actually the question I'm asking. I'm asking why betrayal becomes entertainment when it belongs to somebody that we don't know. Why does distance make us lose empathy? Because I think social media does this with almost everything. Real people's divorces become tea. Mental breakdowns become reaction videos. Family disasters become story times. And infidelity becomes content. Someone else's humiliation becomes a podcast episode. And because we're consuming these things while making dinner, folding washing, or lying in bed, they don't feel real anymore. They're content, characters, algorithms, entertainment, until you're the character. And that's the part I want women to think about. Imagine opening TikTok one evening and hearing a woman telling a hilarious story. She doesn't name the man, obviously, but then she mentions his occupation, and something feels familiar. She mentions the suburb. Your stomach drops. She mentions something strangely specific that he said, and suddenly you realize she's talking about him, your husband, the man sleeping beside you. Imagine opening the comments and seeing thousands of women laughing. Part 2. I'm dying. Girl, tell us everything. Imagine reading those comments while your entire understanding of your marriage is collapsing in real time. Does the story feel different now? Because nothing about the behavior changed. The only thing that changed was your proximity to the consequences. And I think that's worth examining. Not because I want women to stop having compassion for S workers. Actually, I want more compassion. I want compassion for everybody involved. The woman selling the service, the woman who may be struggling inside the industry, the wife who doesn't know, the children who may eventually live through the consequences of a marriage collapsing. Even the man making destructive decisions needs to be understood as a human being, rather than reduced to some ridiculous anonymous character. Understanding somebody doesn't mean excusing what they do. These are two completely different things. And having spent years in this industry, I think one of the most dangerous things we've done culturally is flatten an incredibly complicated world into two extremes. One side says S workers are immoral women destroying marriages, and the other side says S work is simply empowering and anybody questioning it is judgmental. I don't fit comfortably into either of those camps because I've actually lived it. There are incredible women inside this industry. There are women trying to survive. There are women making choices they genuinely believe are empowering. There are women who love the money. There are women who hate what they do. There are women carrying enormous trauma. There are women who will eventually leave, and there are the ones who won't. Human beings are very complicated, and clients are complicated too. But acknowledging complexity doesn't mean pretending actions don't have consequences. That's what bothers me about entertainmentification of the industry. The algorithms love the most outrageous version of everything, the strangest client, the wildest booking, the biggest amount of money, the most shocking confession, because ordinary does not go viral. Outrage does. SEX does. Secrets do. And Storytimes package all three beautifully. But there are human beings behind those stories, and that's what I want us to remember. And there's another layer to this conversation that I think women need to be willing to confront. What are we normalizing through what we repeatedly consume? I'm not saying watching one S-worker story time suddenly changes your morals. I'm asking something more subtle. If we consume enough stories about married men secretly buying, and every story is presented as funny, outrageous, fascinating, or entertaining, does something that should disturb us gradually start to feel ordinary? Not acceptable, necessarily, just normal, expected. Men will be men. Married guys do this all the time. Another story, another laugh, another scroll. I don't think that's harmless, because what a culture laughs at tells us something about what that culture has learned to tolerate. There are things we would never laugh at if we could see the victim standing right in front of us. And perhaps the internet has made it too easy to forget that there's usually somebody standing outside the frame. I also want to say something directly to women currently working in the industry. I'm not sitting here pretending I'm morally superior to you. I've sat where you sit. I've made decisions from inside that world that I understand very differently now that I'm outside of it. And I know how irritating it can be when people who have never lived this life lecture you about it. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm asking all of us, including myself, to look at this world with more honesty. Because there are things normalized when I was inside the industry that I don't normalize anymore. Distance has given me a different perspective, and I think we're capable of holding two truths at once. S-workers deserve dignity, and wives deserve dignity. S-workers deserve compassion, and betrayal still causes devastation. We can refuse to shame women in the industry without turning the industry itself into something glamorous, consequence-free, or socially meaningless. Those positions are not contradictory, they're human. And maybe that's what is missing from this entire conversation. Humanity. Because once you put the humanity back into the story changes. That's somebody's daughter. That's somebody's mother. That's somebody's husband. That's somebody's wife. That's somebody's family. They aren't characters. They're people. So the next time an S-worker story time appears on your feed and the story involves some anonymous married man doing something outrageous, maybe before typing part 2, ask yourself one uncomfortable question. If I discovered this story was about the man sleeping beside me tonight, would I still find it entertaining? And if the answer is no, maybe the question isn't why the story suddenly became wrong. Maybe the question is why it only became disturbing when it became personal. I genuinely want to know what you think about this conversation, because I don't think it ever has an easy answer. Do you think social media has normalized infidelity and the S industry by turning these stories into entertainment? Or do you think that storytime creators are simply telling their own experiences and the responsibility belongs entirely to the married person who made the decision to cheat? Tell me in the comments. But before you answer, really think about it. because I suspect our answer changes dramatically when the anonymous wife in the story is us.